we have it's a modern application that's capable of sending, well, its output is FHIR, but our downstream system, which is an ER triage board, is HL7. So it's expecting HL7. So um, some things to note about the use case is this. There's some assumptions going on with a medical ID that's providing some of the data for the ambulance attendee to be able to populate some of the data that we're going to see on the patient. So I just wanted to say that because people be like, oh, what if the patient's unconscious or something like that? Where are you getting this data from? So that is the story. And so we're going to look at the experience API that was created to accept the FHIR bundle, and then how we're going to process it from FHIR to HL7 and ship it off to the AnyPoint queues that have been set up. And in that process, the FHIR to HL7 connector is going to be shown because it's both the accelerator assets that I'm going to show and the connector do a really good job of helping us expedite that process. So let me see. Okay, perfect. So it's working well. So now this is the Exchange. So those of you familiar, this is Exchange and the healthcare MuleSoft Accelerator for healthcare. And I was introduced to this on a project maybe a few years back. And I have to say that at first glance, I was like, well, I know we did implement a patient 360. I don't know that maybe this data wasn't here yet, but I know that parts of what we implemented were soon to become part of this. But to be honest, when I looked at it, I was thinking, well, if I'm not doing one of these 7 use cases, like how is this really, going to help me, right? And it just kind of seemed, and I did take that Healthcare for Accelerator course, and it kind of focuses on, how to set up the templates for these and the parent and the BOM file and all of that going on. And so I still wasn't quite there with like closing my gap on it. But then when I got this project, I was like, oh, so I've got this FHIR and I want to turn it to HL7. I'm going to come out here and see if there's something that can help us. And I did see this HL7 to FHIR, and I'm like, oh darn, that's the other way, right? So, but no worries. Then I started looking at the FHIR R4 assets, and with those, it's kind of where I got onto what I was able to use for this. And I'm going to actually go over to our Exchange because I bookmarked them so I wouldn't have to be fumbling around searching. But what I did find in those assets were these libraries, and we're going to take a look at how I bring these libraries in, and saves me the time of doing all the data typing. But basically what I used out of the assets was the FHIR bundle library and also the patient library, and then the common library because it's a dependency of both of those others. So if we go over and look at I'm going to bring it to the design center so we can see the assets. So the API specification for that experience API, this is the one that the bundle is going to get posted to. It's really, for those that are not familiar and haven't seen a FHIR bundle, this is my example of what's the inbound. And for this demo, we have 3 entries. We're using a bundle of type collection. And what that means is that you can ship however many entries you want to ship. And they don't have to follow any specific operating process. And this is by specification set out by HL7.org. And so we're going to be focusing today on the patient entry. But I did put these in just so you could see that we could also do it with, we want to know what medications this person's on, if we're able to obtain that information and send it in, and also their known allergies from that medical ID device that they're using. So this is what our inbound bundle looks like. So back to me starting to, okay, I need to get this spec going. What we can do with those assets that we just looked at are make the bundle of type bundle. And this is our reference of a bundle from the library that we've imported as an exchange module. So these are the libraries coming in. And then I have the reference here. And then if you go over here and look at the documentation that gets generated, all of the rules about the bundle per standard are now here for me. And so it's all the way down to data types, requirements. Let's see what things should look like. If it's a coded list of enum values, the enum values will be there to be validated against. And we're going to look at that in Postman in just a second, but I wanted to show it from this perspective. And then I also wanted to show it's very similar in the next layer, which would be the next box down from the use case for the process API. We're going to do the same thing with the patient. And so we're going to use the, instead of the bundle library, we're still going to use the core patient library that was in the assets from the Healthcare Accelerator and the Commons library, right? And so now we're going to be able to just use that patient as the patient type, and we're going to get the same benefit that we saw, the rules and everything around this data per the standard. So this is what, so if anybody has had to ever create their data type in their API specs from scratch, the time that it takes to define the data types, the data elements, basically the rules around what that data looks like, it's a lot, and especially if you have a lot of fields. So all of that work has been simplified and done for us by those exchange modules. So now we want to take a look at how does this, what's actually happening here. And so I just want to show a quick example of that, the validation that we get. So the bundle type is an enum coded list that is in that bundle resource. And so if we put some value that's not correct in there, we actually will get back the response message that says this is not a valid enum type, right? So it does all of the data validation around things. Now there are some things that aren't, well, in this bundle one, these are not being validated because they're being validated with the patient one, but we could also do that as well. I broke them apart so that it would be a little bit easier to see. But this will in fact work with the correct type. And then the other thing, I just want to show an example from the patient one as well, where in addition to like the enum list and all of that, if you remove something that's required, and it looks like I might have taken it out and not putting it back in. So let's go ahead and try this one the way it is. Yeah, so I was testing with this gender key, and it looks like I just didn't put it back. So let's fix that. And also with the gender key, it's the same as the type of collection, where if I'm not putting an appropriate value here, it's going to give me an error message. But so missing keys, not the correct values, or a inappropriate data format will all be coming back here for you. And so that's really what I wanted to say about for me, kind of the unknown advantages of things that are available in the assets that you could just use in a project like this, even though it's not one of those full-scale use cases. So moving on, now we've sort of looked at we've looked at the specification for this and the specification for that. And now I'm going to take you into the code flow so we can take a look at the HL7 connector next, actually, because that is happening before we go to the queue, because we're dropping HL7 on the queue. So let's go to that flow. Okay, so I liken the HL7 connector to being the equivalent of what we just saw for the data typing and validation from the libraries in Exchange, to the same thing, but for HL7. So, and it's kind of the same thing too. If anybody's ever had to map HL7, it's very tedious. I mean, there's so many segments and stuff you have to get right. So this is going to take our our inbound payload of that patient, and then let us just, map it to the appropriate field. So if you remember, we had information about a contact, those are the next of kin. So anybody familiar with the data weave drag and drop to get this stuff mapped? Some things you might have to put a function around if your downstream system. We ran into some cases where the HL7 was non-standard or mixed version, which is why at first I was like, okay, well, I know some of these things are not optional, which is signified by the question mark. But the reason for that is I'm using what's called the LAX connector. And the LAX connector is, let's see if I can, I knew I was going to hit the wrong one. Let me fix this real quick. Thank goodness for resetting perspectives. The LAX connector ones pretty much just say, the schema here just says you don't, these things are not required. So, so this, whatever schema I want, I'm defining in that HL7 connector, getting the mapping done, and then publishing that HL7 message to the queue. So I want to take a minute to look at that queue, talk about it, and some of what I thought were the advantages. And I'll start with, so for healthcare, and from being from a healthcare environment, setting up this queue was really easy. So not having to host my own platform and all of that, and just having to come in and define the queues. And it depends on your use case. Sometimes, maybe this won't be your option, but for this particular one, and because we wanted to show the workings of it. So the ease of use was a big one that got me right off the bat, right? So this one, I don't have any prior knowledge of setting up the queues or anything like that. And so following a tutorial and then learning about the connectors was pretty much how this came about. So for the queues, we're going to be doing this A14 queue. So we're going to try to publish a message to the A14 queue, which is a pre-admit, which is ultimately what we want to send downstream. And just to have one thing I want to mention is that when we publish this, since it's asynchronous, we know that we're going to need to somehow get a status set and get a status back to the calling app. And so I'm using the object store here to store the status of this message. So because I set up a polling API, and we'll look at that in a minute, so that the client could poll to see where their message was at in the process, and if in fact it had been actually accepted by the ED or the ER, right? So that's what that is doing. And so here is the where we're picking up the message, posting it to the downstream system, and then for this particular way that it's set up is this, whatever this, if the status code is what we want, we're going to go ahead and send that ACK. So we're doing a manual acknowledgement so that if something happens along the way to here, it'll just automatically stay on the queue and doesn't just get lost, right? So, and if it's not the error code we want, we're just going to knack it and let that message go back to the queue. And then for whatever condition happens, we will update the status to either be still in progress or as being processed by the downstream system. So, so that's that. So we're going to go ahead and see if we can catch it. The timing is a little tricky. We're going to try to post this bundle and see if we can catch it in flight before it gets posted. So let me do that now. So this is our experience API. It's currently running and deployed to Cloud Hub. And so this is the ID, and I'm going to go ahead and grab that for us so that we can refer back to it. But let's see if we actually, oh no, let's see if we actually get to catch it in flight here. And if not, we can always send it another request. Oh, cool. So here it is. So here's the message that we just sent as it landed on the queue. And um, for anybody that's new at testing any of this stuff, so this message browser is actually a consumer client. So while I was trying to test, I didn't realize this message was being blocked by this client. So just something to be aware of. I'm sure everybody else probably knows that, but I did not. So I learned that. And so here is our message that we just pushed up. And so I'm going to go ahead and let it, well, let's see if we can check the status, because currently, so this is that polling endpoint. This is in the Experience API. It's actually going to read the object store of the FHIR process API and determine whether, I don't think I copied it for some reason. Let me grab that. It's going to let us know where we're at in the process. So right now we should not see that it completed because it's in fact still in flight. So it's been accepted, which is a legit status for it, but it has not been sent downstream yet. So we're going to go ahead and release it here. And then that's going to give us it's going to give us the ability now to let go of that message. And that message then should, within 2 minutes, because I have a delay set, this should change into being processed by the ED. So we'll give it a minute. I'm impatient, so I keep clicking the button. But it ultimately should give us back the status from that object store. And if we go to the object store and kind of look at what's it look like when it's being stored, I did this one just ahead of time, and it is the just my little text string message is being stored as a binary value, and I'm just using the message ID as the key ID for simplicity. And so let's check now and see if it's still in the accepted phase. Ultimately, it shouldn't take any more than 4 minutes, so I don't know exactly what we're at for time. And we could go here and look at it, but then I'm thinking it's going to put a lock on it as well. So
yeah, just wait for it to go through. That's fine. We've got a question in the chat, and
okay.
Sophia has answered it already. But just to give you the opportunity to to allow that to work, and then to
get through the flow.
Yeah, Vikas is asking, HL7 is a message-based protocol, and FHIR is similar to REST. How are we converting messages to request-response format? Are we storing all the messages in some store and then querying it later on? And I know the answer, but I'm going to let you handle it, because this is the beauty of using an asset like this.
Well, I'm glad you know the question, because I was thinking about something, but I don't think I quite followed the question. So
okay, it is.
If you want to take a stab at it, you're more than welcome to.
Right. Well, and Sophia, responded on it too. So the first part of the question is, how are we converting messages to that FHIR response format, the request response format? And that is the converter that Audrey's using, the connector to convert from HL7 to FHIR. And that's one of the assets that is in the Healthcare Accelerator. And so to answer your next question, are we storing all of the messages in some store and then querying it later on? And Sophia really answered that one. Really there's really no need to save the data. We are using the object store to maintain state of the process. But Audrey, if you want to expand upon that,
And we could also have stored the message there as well, right? And we're going to, like for demo purposes, we're going to do some other types of checking. And so we will be expecting an acknowledgement from the downstream system as well. That part, we just did not code out the system API or have that here for visibility. So I didn't think I could fit it into 20 minutes. So, so that there will be some additional things happening for that. And we could very well put it in the object store, because we definitely have enough, there is a limit on the space of the binary object, but we're not going to hit it with this.
Yeah, which means it's the object store, for those of you who do not know this, it stores in a key value pair. And so the value portion it just can't exceed 10 megabytes. And I don't think any of the messages would be more than 10 megabytes, would you?
No,
Yeah, so they're going to be
no,
small enough. Okay. I see that
right.
it works. So, Vikas, I hope that
Oh, yeah.
answered your question. Yeah.
Yeah, and so ultimately it did get picked up. And normally this would be instantaneous, but for the demo, I set that subscriber to polling. So here, I'll show you what I mean so that I'm not just, so I set this to poll instead of, normally it would just be listening to and grabbing things or however you want to configure it, right? But I set it to poll just deliberately so that I could go there and show you the message had landed in the queue. So and then I put a 2-minute delay, but it's kind of tricky because whatever time the runtime starts up, it delays 2 minutes, and then for each time that a message is published, it's a 2-minute delay. So you just kind of got to get in there with the timing. So it worked out pretty good. It just took a little bit longer to see it actually get pushed down through the subscriber flow. And that really is that concludes the flow. So we saw it go, here and then down into the system that we were expecting, and that was that last status message that we were going after. So
great. Because I'm so glad you are asking questions about this, because it really is a great demo. He is curious, how are you mocking HL7 messages? Is there some app which emits HL7 messages which can be used for development? Now we had, go ahead, Audrey, I'll let you explain where our HL7 message was coming from. We've got a separate app that's doing that.
Well, and in this scenario, like I didn't have to mock it. It got created here by this connector, right? So if you had a FHIR input, but if you're just saying in general, mocking, there are a couple of websites I could look up and drop in the chat probably where you can get sample messages.
Nice. Yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah, because we're actually doing HL7 to, I'm sorry, the FHIR message to HL7. And in this case, the use case was communicating with a legacy system. So not only do we want to convert from HL7 to FHIR, but oftentimes, like in this case, and I know of real life examples like that we're actually, converting it back to an HL7.
Right. And I don't know how I'm doing on time, but one of my future things that I want to do now that I'm digging into the accelerator and looking at all of the cool stuff that's out here, and I even left a comment, huge time save. The FHIR RAML auto generator, for anybody that's ever used a implementation guide, a FHIR implementation guide, this is supposed to take the JSON example from the IG kit and generate the spec for you, is what I'm told, or what I'm reading. So I definitely want to give that a try. So because I think if you're, there's just so many things. Like there's so many different things that you need to do to move data around in healthcare, right? So I think maybe with this stuff, we were always thinking of this grand scale, but there's so many sort of little other smaller things that this would just be so much quicker for. So helpful.
Absolutely. Well, good. I see a part 2 coming. Well, and
Right.
also, Shivani, I know that you worked on a project. You guys were working on a proof of concept, and you were trying to figure out how you were going to do the FHIR server, and really all of that comes bundled with this would have made. I know when I had Shivani and Ryan were in the healthcare accelerator class, Audrey